Holly Harvey was considered a typical rebellious teenager. She did what she wanted, went where she wanted, and saw who she wanted. That all changed in the spring of 2004 when Holly's mother went to prison, forcing her to move in with her conservative Baptist grandparents, Carl and Sarah Collier, who immediately imposed strict rules. Holly's life would become anything but typical when she went from rebellious teenager to murderer in just 4 months. Our episodes deal with serious and often distressing incidents. If at any time you feel like you need support, please contact your local crisis centre. This episode discusses murder and therefore may be graphic and upsetting. It may not be suitable for all listeners. Listener discretion is advised. Carl and Sarah Collier couldn't have children, so they decided to adopt 2 children to raise as their own. More than 30 years later, they looked with pride upon their adopted son Kevin, who is active in the church and followed his father's footsteps in working for Delta Airlines. However, when it came to their adopted daughter Carla, the Colliers had reason to seek group prayer at their Baptist church. Carla took a different path. She had 2 daughters fathered by 2 different men and was also a known troublemaker. Carla was arrested on a drug conviction and was imprisoned at the Metro State Prison in the spring of 2004. At that time, the Colliers decided to have Holly live with them. Holly's father was unable to properly care for his daughter due to a car accident that left him paralysed and confined to a wheelchair. The Colliers had their hands full with Holly, who proved to be even more rebellious than her mother. She repeatedly tried to run away, although she was always brought back. No matter how much love and compassion the Colliers tried to show their granddaughter, they were rejected. It was clear that Holly was a deeply troubled young woman. Holly Harvey, born in 1989, was 15 at the time. She had lived with her grandparents Carl and Sarah Collier, aged 74 and 73 respectively, at their Fayette County home in Georgia for just 4 months when she decided that she had had enough. Holly had no intention of going to church as her grandparents had hoped, or conforming to the rules imposed on her. Nor did she want to give up her one true love, Sandra or Sandy Ketchum, aged 16, whom she was forbidden to see. Holly decided that she was not going to allow her grandparents to interfere with her decision-making any longer. She was going to live her life the way she deemed fit. In the summer of 2004, she recruited her lover Sandy to assist her in a gruesome plan, which they believed would allow them to gain freedom and be able to stay together forever. Their devious plot would eventually lead to the brutal murders of Carl and Sarah Collier. The Colliers believed that their granddaughter was up to no good, and they began to fear her. Holly had become increasingly abusive towards them. She had even begun to make death threats. It was so bad that Carl even approached his adopted son Kevin sometime in late July and told him that Holly wanted him dead. Neither Holly nor Sandy were secretive about their evil intentions. The girls were brazen enough to tell their friends that they were going to kill Holly's grandparents. Both girls were actively looking for a gun, asking whomever they knew about how to obtain one so that they could carry out their plans. Although they did not succeed in finding one, they didn't let it hamper their plans. On the 2nd of August 2004, the 2 girls finally decided to act out their threats. That evening, Sandy Ketchum, who had snuck into Holly's basement bedroom the previous day, talked about killing Holly's grandparents. The girls reviewed their plan in detail, which had been broken down into 4 key steps. Just in case, Holly wrote the to-do list on her arm in ink. The list read: kill, keys, money, and jewellery. The 2 girls began to smoke marijuana, hoping to lure the Colliers down into the basement with the smell. It didn't take long for Holly's grandparents to react. When Carl and Sarah reached the room, Sandy was already hidden behind the bed, armed with a knife. Holly was also clutching a knife, waiting to lunge at whoever came at her first. When the couple entered the room, an argument quickly ensued, and Holly stabbed her grandmother in the back. Carl and Sarah managed to wrestle her to the bed, trying to prevent her from stabbing her grandmother again, but Holly shouted for assistance. Sandy then leapt from behind the bed and got involved in the struggle. During the attack, Sarah suffered more than 20 stab wounds to her chest and back before dying. Although Carl had also been stabbed repeatedly, he was able to run upstairs to the kitchen, where he tried to call the police. Holly chased after him and cut the phone lines. Carl tried to stop his granddaughter by throwing a coffee cup at her, but it didn't work. Holly caught up to him and dealt the final fatal blows that left Carl lying face down on the kitchen floor in a pool of his own blood. He had sustained around 15 stab wounds to the chest and neck. After the brutal murders, the 2 girls scoured the house for money and jewellery, and found only the latter, which they placed in a bag along with some clothes and other items. They then grabbed Carl's car keys and took off in his dark blue 2002 Chevrolet Silverado pickup truck. The 2 blood-soaked girls immediately drove to Griffin in Georgia and dropped in to see a friend named Sarah Polk, aged 16. When they arrived, Sarah met the girls outside and noticed that both girls were covered head to toe in blood. Sarah asked Sandy, "What did you do?" Holly then pulled out a kitchen knife and said, "We killed my grandparents." Sandy asked Sarah if they could come in and shower, but Sarah refused, bringing them both a towel instead and telling them to leave. Sarah then informed her mum of the alleged murder. A short while later, Sarah called the police and tearfully told them what the girls had done. Following up on the call, the police immediately visited the Colliers' home and found the bodies of Sarah and Carl. County Sheriff Randall Johnson commented on the scene, saying, "I've never seen a crime this serious in 28 years that I've been sheriff, of this magnitude, on kinfolk." An arrest warrant was secured for Holly and Sandy, and officers quickly set out to find them and the stolen truck. In the meantime, Holly and Sandy were at the beach on Tybee Island, located outside of Savannah in Georgia. While there, they met 2 brothers, Clayton, 22, and Brett, 14, who had just moved into a new house with their parents several hours earlier. The 2 girls, using the pseudonyms Jessica and Casey, told the brothers they had nowhere to go, and one of the girls mentioned that her grandmother just recently passed away. One of the girls claimed to have her grandmother's jewellery in her possession and asked Clayton to pawn it off for her so she and her friend would have some money. Clayton refused. Having no money and nowhere to sleep, the girls asked if they could stay at the brothers' house. The mother of the 2 young men gave permission for the girls to spend the night with the family. The next morning, those in the household awoke to more than 24 police officers at the front door. Holly and Sandy had been traced through their mobile phone signal. The family stood in complete shock as Holly and Sandy were arrested for the murders of the Colliers. As they patted Sandy down, they discovered she had a knife in her pocket. Lieutenant Colonel Bruce Jordan of the Fayette County Sheriff's Office said that officers were led to believe that there was a possibility that the girls had planned to kill the boy's mother in order to steal her car. Luckily, the family escaped any injury. At the time of the arrest, Holly surprised officers when she laughed as she walked past them. Jordan stated in his report that Holly acted callous and cocky, showing no remorse for the horrible crimes she had committed. On the other hand, Sandy Ketchum did show regret for what she had done, and told officers that she would fully cooperate with them in their investigation. Once the girls were in custody, the stolen truck was searched. Investigators found a bag of the girls' belongings, which contained 2 bloodied knives and blood-stained clothes. Based on the evidence, there was little, if any, doubt that Holly and Sandy were responsible for the murders. However, what investigators and the girls' families couldn't fathom was why they would commit such atrocious acts. The question was left for the state and the girls' attorneys to answer. Following the murders, investigators found a poem written by Holly at the crime scene, which revealed valuable insight into her mental state leading up to the crimes. The poem described how depressed she had been and that she cried herself to sleep. Even more troubling was a line of the poem that read, "All I want to do is kill." And kill she did. Sandy also suffered her own problems growing up. Her mother abandoned her when she was 15 months old. After that, she had 3 stepmothers, including one who was accused of physically abusing her. Having been abandoned or abused by the women closest to her in her family, Sandy looked for female companionship and acceptance elsewhere. She believed she found it in her relationship with Holly. The love Sandy received from her became so important in her life that she would do anything not to lose it, even murder. Some might say the road to the Colliers' tragic death began in 1967, when they adopted their daughter Carla. Although they were conscientious parents who insisted on regular bedtimes and getting to know all their children's friends, they had difficulties with Carla as a teen. She battled them constantly over her choice of friends and her drug and alcohol use. Through the years, Carla was jailed 3 times in connection with drug and alcohol violations. Holly's father and Carla's common-law husband, Gene Harvey, had also been in trouble with the law and played no role in Holly's life. Although well behaved as a child, as a teen, Holly began to rival her mother's wild ways. She would sneak out of the house when her mother was at work. She was often found with Sandy, who lived nearby with her father, Tim Ketchum. The girls became friends in middle school and at some point became romantically involved. Sandy, according to a statement her father gave in court, often ran away from home and was on probation for drug use. Then, in April 2003, Carla was arrested for marijuana possession with intent to sell. After her mother began a 3-year prison term, Holly was alone, and her grandparents took her in. They loved Holly and wanted to provide a wholesome home for her, said long-term family friend John Webster. But she couldn't live under the rules. And the rules, come home each night, no drinking, no smoking pot or cigarettes in the house, really weren't that strict. As the regular blow-ups and arguing intensified, her grandparents forbade her to see Sandy, less because of their romance than her police record. Nevertheless, On the 10th of June, the pair ran away together, turning up 4 days later, 20 miles away in Griffin, Georgia, at the home of Sandy's birth mother, Sandra Maddox. When they did it again a couple of weeks later, the Colliers, at wit's end, reported Holly to authorities and she was placed on probation. As soon as they walked out of court, she fired up a cigarette. She then stubbed it out on her grandfather's truck. At dinner that Sunday, the Colliers told Kevin that Holly had become enraged when they forbade her to take their pickup truck to the beach, even though she had no driver's license. The next afternoon, the grandparents would die at the hands of Holly and Sandy. On the 5th of August 2004, the girls appeared in bulletproof vests before a Fayette County Magistrate Court judge to hear the charges filed against them. Holly and Sandy were charged as adults with 2 felony counts of murder and 2 counts of malice murder. As the counts were being read aloud, Holly and Sandy sobbed, as if finally realising the extent of their crimes. In accordance with Georgia state law, the death penalty did not apply to their case because Holly and Sandy were under 17 years of age. After the charges were read, the girls were escorted to 2 separate detention centres where they remained until their bond hearing. 2 weeks later, the girls appeared before a Superior Court judge to find out if they could be released on bond. During the proceedings, Lieutenant Colonel Bruce Jordan testified that Sandy was deeply affected by the crimes she had committed. Holly and Sandy were not only denied bond for felony and malice murder charges, but also faced new charges of armed robbery. The judge declared the girls a flight risk and said that he would accelerate the time before trial. In February 2005, Holly and Sandy appeared at the Fayette County Superior Court and waived their rights to formal arraignments. In doing so, the girls thus entered pleas of not guilty. Their trial date was set for the 21st of March 2005. During the trial in April 2005, both girls changed their pleas to guilty after their trial had begun to garner national headlines. As part of her plea, Holly detailed how she killed the couple. For half an hour, she choked back sobs and spoke softly as she recounted the killings to Fayette County Superior Court Judge Pascal English. Holly spoke about the stabbings and the blood, which Holly said felt like a bucket of hot water. Holly and her friend had stayed out all night and spent the morning of the killings listening to music in the base room bedroom of her grandparents' North Fayette home. This was when Sandy suggested stealing the grandparents' truck to get something to calm us down. Holly said, "We'll have to kill them to do that, but I didn't mean nothing by that," she told the judge. Sandy suggested hitting them in the head with a lamp, and then suggested getting a knife. "I got the biggest knife I could find out of the kitchen," Holly said, adding that they practiced stabbing a mattress to see if the knife was sharp enough. When the grandparents came downstairs to get a suitcase, Holly said she stabbed her grandmother. "My eyes were closed the whole time," she said. Her grandfather then pinned her down, and Holly said she stabbed him in the chest. She pursued him as he ran upstairs and tried to call for help, pulling the phone out of the wall. "He grabbed the knife, and I thought he was going to stab me," Holly said, adding that she took the knife from him and started attacking him. When the judge asked Holly why she did it, the teen said, "For Sandy," and added, "so that we could be together." Sandy's hearing was much shorter. She was not forced to detail the crime because she was immediately cooperative with authorities. showed remorse, and was prepared to testify against Holly at trial, factors which justified a lighter sentence. Outside the courthouse, Tim Ketchum, her father, said, "I can't explain it. I'm not that type of person," he said. "I didn't raise her to be that type of person. I want to say to the community, I'm very sorry this happened." The teens had faced 2 counts of felony murder, 2 counts of malice murder, and 1 count of armed robbery. The maximum sentence the girls could have received was life in prison without parole. Sandy Ketchum received a lighter sentence for her cooperation. On the 29th of April 2005, she was sentenced to serve 3 life sentences with parole for murder and armed robbery, to be served consecutively. She would be eligible for parole after serving 10 years. Holly Harvey was sentenced to 2 life sentences in prison after pleading guilty to 2 counts of malice murder. Because of her age, she was not eligible for the death penalty. She would not be eligible for parole until after she served 20 years in prison. Judge English asked Holly after sentencing her if a 20-year minimum in prison was a good deal for killing her grandparents. She answered no. When he asked what she thought should happen to her, Holly replied, "I think I should be dead." In response, the judge muttered, "We can both agree on that." As of the publishing of this episode, on the 17th of April, 2024, Holly Harvey and Sandy Ketchum are still serving time in prison. Thank you for listening to this episode of Shadow Crimes. If you liked this episode, be sure to follow us on social media and check out our website at shadowcrimes.com. You can also listen to this podcast on YouTube, Spotify, Amazon, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, as well as all other podcast platforms. Be sure to check out our other episodes and stay tuned for new episodes released every Wednesday here on Shadow Crimes, where mysteries thrive and shadows speak.